the making of the Grizzly Grump behind the scenes trailer. I, of course, am the moon. As you know, I brought the Grump into this world and feel somewhat responsible for this. So I hope you enjoy this explanation of why he came into the world.
Hi, I'm Sam Cullingworth and I'm the author of The Grizzly Grump and His Terrible Trump. There's actually been a hiatus of some 28 years in between writing anything, although I have been an avid reader of poetry and things like that. I've spent more time working physical side, training with weights, competing as a bodybuilder and flying paragliders all over the world. I have had a long career in television and more recently been acting in feature films and appearing in TV commercials. First of all, I'd like to talk about the desire to write. The interesting thing about the desire to write is that it forms a lot of what your content is going to have. For me, having only written Return of the Triffids aged 13 to now, this is a totally different thought pattern that I go through when I write. The desire to write stems from a father's love for his child or a deep-seated emotional desire to convey something to somebody else. After all, African folk stories, which I did study as a child, always had these elements in them.
Right, my name is Nick Cullingworth and I'm the illustrator of The Grizzly Grump and His Terrible Trump. Now, I think perhaps the book is done in illustrations in ink, pen and ink, but the original drawings are done in pencil. And basically you do a tracing of them and then you draw over them in ink. And I think it might be of some interest to show how the Grizzly Grump is drawn, the eponymous hero of this book. And the first thing we notice about him is that he has a typical pear-shaped figure. So his body is shaped something like this, and then we start thinking about his arms. His arms are usually held down the side of his body like this, to each side. Nothing very special about his arms, except that he wears a characteristic mohair pullover, which doesn't come down very far on his body. So the bottom of the mohair pullover is there, and it doesn't even come down to his tummy button, which we'll see later on. His sleeves are rolled up, so he can mark where his sleeves come. And his head is the shape of a rugby ball, so we put a head on which looks like that. We don't worry too much about the neck. Sometimes he has a bit of a neck and sometimes he hasn't. The expression on his face is very grumpy, which means that his eyebrows are beetling down like that, and at first when you draw him it looks as though he's just gone to sleep, but in fact it isn't like that, because he has these big globular eyes which are almost always staring, and then under his eyes, or between his eyes, he has a nose. The nose is a good no-nonsense nose. Usually hasn't got nostrils, but occasionally it has. And then he tends to stare forwards unless he has some reason for looking sideways. If he's looking sideways, he's about to do something, but if he's staring forwards, it's because he's about to confront some problem, and there are usually plenty of problems around in the Grizzly Grump's life. His mouth is rather like a goalpost or something like that, and then his hair sticks up, and it sticks up particularly when mobile phones and things like that ring. And he also has a goatee beard. A goatee beard is similar to the beard of a billy goat, that is a male goat, and it comes down, sticking out more from the chin than anywhere else, rather like that. He has some quite big ears of a rubbery appearance, like that, with a sticking out bit in the middle, which he uses to hear mobile phones with when they ring. And then there we are with his head. His shoulders are nothing special, despite the fact he's very strong, but because his pullover is made of mohair, it has a hairy appearance, which is obvious on some of the drawings in the book. Going further down his arms are actually quite thin, although they're immensely strong at times, and his fingers are rather like the bananas on a hand of bananas, so they just go like that, with rounded ends, and he has a similar thumb, the thumb being an opposable thumb, not the kind of thumb that you get on a chimpanzee, but a human thumb coming out at the other side. And then his other arm ought to be a mirror image of the first one, hopefully with the same number of fingers, and a sticking out thumb like that. Now, although we don't know much about his birth, he does have a belly button, which is rather like an ordinary button, and sometimes has some threads in it which help to attach it to his stomach. Underneath his stomach, and often hidden by it, is a belt, so you might see the end of his belt, and then his legs are also rugby ball shaped, or like pairs of rugby balls, and they come down like that. And he's notable for the baggy trousers that he wears, so the trousers really go over the shape of the leg, rather like this. They come together a bit at the bottom, and they're roughly the same width at each side. So they're like that, and then at the bottom of his feet, on his feet, he has these plastic shoes, which are rather big, not very comfortable. They have a sole along the bottom, and strips of plastic across the top like this to hold them down, and another strip of plastic going along the top which is almost woven into it, and the other is a mirror image of that first shoe, like that, again with the plastic sole and these plastic strips. And one of the most difficult things about drawing him is a rather boring collection of black and white checks that it has on his trousers, which go like this. And that's most of what we can say about him. We put in some shading to make him look more solid, shaded under the arms, around the top of his roll of mohair here, some light shading under his tummy to give his tummy a nice round look, because as Simon says somewhere in the book, he may have eaten too many pies. And then that's really about it. And with his bare hands, which he's got some nails on, by the way, on his fingers, he uses his hands for digging a lot in the ground and things like that, so his nails tend to be rather short. And he sets out to face the world in a, not exactly an aggressive way, but a confrontational way. But he knows no fear, or rather he feels fear, but he doesn't show it usually. And an admirable character. I salute him. And I think that's all I've got to say about him for the time being.
Finally, I'd like to say a word about the audio buttons that I have created for this book that interact with the pictures and the story. I'd like to say a very big thank you to my sister Chloe for providing the fiddle experience, my nieces and nephews for all their sound effects that they've contributed, and finally to my good friend Ali Attarod for his remarkable piano solo at the end of the book. Thank you very much.